everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I have a really fun sewing slash quilting video for you today. We are going to make this really cute tote bag. This is a really simple project. It's definitely beginner friendly, and really you can take the skills that I'm going to teach you in this video and make a bag any size that you like, just employing the same techniques. But I will include cutting instructions below for my exact size bag. This is a pretty good size tote bag. It's not super large, not too tiny. I made it specifically to fit my laptop in, and I have a Windows Surface Pro, but you could also put library books in here, or craft projects or school books or notebooks or anything like that. So this finished bag that I'm making is about 12 inches high by about 13.5 inches wide, and I will include all the specific cutting instructions for you below, but like I said, you can really make it any size that you want. So let's go ahead and get started making our bag. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to need for supplies. I will put the exact cutting instructions for this particular bag in the down bar below, so you'll have all the sizes down there. But basically, I used 5 fat quarters and 1 of these mini charm packs. So you're going to need 2 pieces for this top section right here, and then I used a charm pack for this patchwork section. If you don't have a mini charm, or you would like to just dig into your stash and do a little stash busting, you can use 42 2.5 inch squares. And again, I'll have all this below, but that was right there. You're going to need 1 piece for the bottom portion of your bag, and then you're going to need a piece for your pocket and 2 pieces for your handles. And then the other thing that we're going to need is some lining fabric. And because I was using fat quarters, I had to kind of piece together mine because my fat quarter wasn't large enough. So I actually cut this fat quarter in half and then added this chunk, and I'll have the measurements below, but this was 3.5 by 14.5, and this was 10.5 by 14.5. And I made 2 of those, and then I trimmed them to be the correct size below, which is 13.5 by 14.5. And then in addition to your lining fabric, you're going to need some batting. And so you're going to need a large chunk. Again, measurements will be below for the actual bag itself. I decided to line my handles just so that they were a little bit kind of sturdier, a little bit thicker, and I felt like that would make them a little bit stronger as well. You can skip this step if you like. And then I also put a little bit of batting in my pocket to make it a little bit thicker as well. So these 2 are kind of optional. You can skip those if you don't want to line your handles and your pocket. I kind of like the way it feels. Makes the handles a little bit more stronger. And same thing with the pocket. It's got a little bit more grip in it. Now my bag is pretty squishy, and I'm just using regular cotton quilt batting. This is stuff that I have left over from my quilt projects, so I really like to use them for bags. However, it is pretty floppy. If you would like to have a bag that holds its shape a little bit more, you could always use fusible fleece instead of the cotton batting. You can also use, there's like a bag foam, I can't remember what it's called right now, I'll try and find it and link it below, but it's a little bit denser of a foam, and it actually will create a bag that can kind of stand up on its own. Anything you want to use in your bag is totally fine. I just like to use my leftover my leftover batting, because that way I'm kind of using up, the little pieces that I cut off after I'm doing quilts, and I don't feel like I'm wasting it and that kind of thing. But you can use whatever you like. And then for this particular project, I used fabric from the Farmer's Daughter line by Lella Boutique. This is a new line depending on when you're watching this video. If you're watching it right when it uploads, this should be in stores right now, but it's just a really beautiful line. I love her fabric, and I just pulled 5 fat quarters out of here for this project, but with the requirements below, you can certainly, grab from your stash, or, go out and get your own yardage, or however you want to do it. That's just how I did my project. All right, so let's get started sewing. The first thing that we're going to do is create this kind of patchwork section right here, because these 2 pieces are already cut to size, so we don't really need to worry about those, but this one we need to get placed together. Aside from fabric goodies, the other thing you'll need is a self-healing mat, a clear acrylic ruler. I like these Creative Grid ones, and I'll put a link for all of this below. Some kind of a rotary trimmer, and either some pins or some of these Clover Wonder Clips. They're great. You don't have to have these, but maybe just something to pin your project together with. And then I like to use this 505 basting spray. You don't have to have this either. You can also pin your quilting, pin baste your quilting as well. But these are just some additional supplies you'll need. Everything is out of the way, and I take my mini charm pack, and we're going to open her up. I think that's always the hardest part for me. And then I am going to just spread all of these out in a way that's pleasing, to the eye. You can, of course, do it however you like. I'll show you what I come up with. But we're going to put 3 down and 7 across. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just start laying these out, and then I'll catch back up with you when I am done. Okay, so here we are, and I've got 2 sections. I've got this top one and this bottom one, and I just kind of spread them out however I think looks best. You can spread yours out however you like them. And now we're going to chain piece these together. So if you're not familiar with chain piecing, basically it just means that I'm going to sew quite a few of these together without cutting my thread in between. So how I do it is I sew down this one first, and then I'm actually going to do both of them together, so hopefully this isn't confusing. And then also these, and then I'm going to add on this row, and I'll just sew all the way down and continue doing that. So how I do that is, and that's just because it's faster. If this gets confusing for you, just, you know, do it however it works best for you. But I'm basically going to take this row and flip it on top of this row, like so, and I just line up these little points on there, and just make sure that you've got right sides together as usual. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch all over this bag unless I otherwise specify it. So I'm going to take these over to my machine, and I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch down those, and then I'm going to not break my thread at all in between this process, and then I'm going to do these. And then I'll show you what that looks like when I come back, and we'll add this row. So I'm going to just carefully stack these in order that I need to sew them and bring them over to my machine. All right, so here's my stack. I literally just moved it over to my machine without turning them or anything like that. And we are just going to sew using a straight stitch. I do about 2.5 inch stitch length, but you can of course do whatever you want. And we're gonna sew 1/4 inch down each side. And as you'll see when I'm done, I'm not gonna cut my thread at all. I'm just going to continue sewing. So let's go ahead and get started. And I apologize, I'll try and cut out my machine here because it can be kind of loud. So I'm not cutting my thread at all. Just gonna keep going. And I'm just kind of relining these up to make sure that they're nice and square. Okay, so those were my first 3 for the top one. And then now I'm going to do my first 3 for my bottom one. Okay, now I'm actually not going to cut this thread. I'm just going to leave these all chain piece together. I'm going to keep them in the same order and bring them back over to my cutting mat. Okay, so we're back over at our cutting mat, and this is the row that I've sewed together. They're still attached. I have not cut the strings or anything, and I also haven't ironed at this stage. Now, if I was doing this at home without trying to film a video, I wouldn't even bring this over here. I would just pull it back up to the beginning and then just add these all along, but I wanted to kind of show you the concept. So here's the row we just stitched, and now we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to take row 3, and we're just going to lay them across. And really what I do is I just pick them up in order and bring the new pile over to my machine, and then as I get to each one I can just put it back on. You can also take a picture of this with your camera in case you're worried you're going to get out of order, but we're going to take this bundle back over there and then just continue sewing on the 3rd strip, and then we're going to do the same thing for the rest of the 4. Okay, so here is my finished chain piece project, and as you can see, it's all still attached to one another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the 2 sections together, but I am going to cut apart just the middle row here so that I now have my top section, or my front of my bag and my back of my bag. And then all I'm going to do is take these over to the sewing machine, and I flip them over this way. And then because I want my seams to nest, I'm going to just iron them going opposite directions. So for example, for this top row, I'm going to iron all of my seams going this way. And then for the middle row, they'll all go this way. And then for the bottom row, they'll all go this way. And that way, when you go to sew these 3 rows together, your seams will nest really well. And I'll show you what that looks like. And everything you'll have great corner points and all that. So I'm going to do that really quickly, but do not cut these rows apart. These little chain piece stitches will help you keep all of your little pieces in order so that you don't accidentally, move anything around. Alright, so I have pressed both of my sections, and as you can see, these seams are going this way, these ones are going this way, and these ones are going this way, and that's going to make our corners really nice and crisp. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this one of the panels, it doesn't matter which one, and we're going to flip it right side over, and then I'm just going to take one of the sections and flip it on top of the other section. And then as you'll notice, now that we did our seams going in opposite directions, you'll kind of see that they sort of snap together right there. You've got this seam going this way and this seam going this way. So you've got what's called a nested seam. And you can take and stick a pen in there. If you have a lot of these, sometimes I will do that. Since this is a bag and they were all pre-cut, I'm actually not going to go ahead and pin. But if you're a newer sewer, you may want to just go along and put a pin in each one of these little junctions. But let's take this over to our sewing machine, and we are going to sew 1/4 inch all the way down this edge, and then when we're done with that, we're actually going to do the same thing with the bottom row. So let's pretend like we sewed those. We'll just flip up this bottom row, again nest your seams, and sew 1/4 inch here. So let's go over and do that. Okay, so that's my first one, and since I'm at my sewing machine, I'm just going to go ahead and open this up. And there we go. And then I'm going to fold over the other side and just do the same thing, just nesting my seams as I go. And I'm just going to get this first one kind of set, and then I'll do the other ones as I go. There you go. And so you've got one of your panels, and we'll take this over to the ironing board and iron it, but I'm going to sew up the other one really fast. Pieces done. We're going to take our 2 top portions of our bag, and we're going to sew them to each of these. Now, if you have a directional print, you'll just want to kind of pay attention to that here. I want my writing, going up, right side up, and you wanted to kind of pay attention to that when you were sewing these together as well. But as long as you picked up your pieces like I did, then they should have all stayed in the right direction. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this piece onto this section, and I want my writing going up, so that looks fine. I'm going to flip it together, right sides together, and then I'm going to sew 1/4 inch across my piece, and then I'm going to do the same thing with this one, and then we'll meet you back here. One thing I did want to mention really quick is my bag is 14.5 inches wide, which means that I'm going to need to trim off a little bit of this excess over here. So I just center my bag piece on here. When I get that on there, then I'll trim it up, and then we'll add the bottom. If you would like, you could make your bag, I think this would be 15 inches wide instead. I just wanted to give myself a little bit of leeway for, if I have any kind of crooked edges, when I was sewing my patchwork together. And also that's the size that measured for my laptop. So, but you can make yours however wide you would like. Going to set that seam really quickly, and then normally I would press towards the darker fabric, but since there's so many seams on this side, it'll lay a little bit flatter if you press towards the solid piece and not the patchwork piece. Okay, so here's our 2 pieces, and because I have writing on mine, yours may not matter, but I definitely, made sure that I had my writing going the same direction. I'm actually going to turn them sideways. So this is the top on one side, and then you're going to flip this second piece over, because that's the top for your other side. And then we're going to sew in the bottom portion of our bag right here. And so all I'm going to do is line those up. So we've got top, patchwork, bottom, patchwork, top. And then I'm just going to flip this over onto this piece and sew 1/4 of an inch down. And then once that's done, I'll flip this piece over onto the bottom and sew 1/4 of an inch down so that I have one continuous piece. Now, if you want to skip all of this, you know, patchworking and whatnot, you could just do one solid piece. That would measure, and I'll put the measurements below, but it's basically 14.5 by about 27 inches. So totally up to you. I think it looks cute to add all these different fabrics. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to sew here, and then we'll have the outside of our bag complete. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is lay out our big piece of batting, and or like I said, you could use fusible fleece or whatever. And I forgot to mention, but I did put it in the description box. You're also going to want some spray-based fabric adhesive. I use 505. You could also pin this. You don't have to use spray basting if you don't like that. I do just for just ease. And then we're going to place our finished outside fabric here. And I'm just going to smooth it out. Make sure that you have some little bit of batting sticking out on all 4 sides. I definitely have more than I need here, about 1 inch or so on all 4 sides. And then I basically, this is how I do my big quilts as well, but I basically spread it all out, get it smooth, and then I roll it up. And then I go ahead and just spray a little bit there, and make sure you have your windows opened if you're going to use spray basting. But I just spray and smooth. And this is basically just going to keep it from shifting around on you while we do our quilting. Like I said, you can pin this as well. I like spray basting just because it's kind of easier, and then I don't have to deal with the pins. And then see, I can pull it till I can feel the spray basting on that other side there. And you just kind of smooth it out. You'll be able to feel if there's any crinkles. And you don't need like a ton. Just enough to hold it in place while you quilt it. And then I just smooth out any wrinkles at this point. All right, now this part is the fun part, and you can do whatever you want here. You can do free motion quilting, you can do straight line quilting, anything that you want. If you are using fusible fleece, you actually don't have to quilt it at all, because when you iron it to the fusible fleece, the fusing actually sticks to your fabric, so you could kind of skip the quilting part if you aren't comfortable with that. I do have a video tutorial on how to straight line quilt and how to free motion quilt on my YouTube channel. I will link those below if you're interested. I think because I did a patchwork on here and I've got this gingham, I'm probably going to go with some straight line quilting. So I'm probably just going to echo and do lines everywhere that I've got seams. And just to kind of, it holds it onto your batting, and it just gives it a little bit of a decorative touch. And then once I get up here, I'll probably do some straight lines on both of these sides. And then I'm not sure what I'm going to do on this. Maybe some diagonals. We'll see what I feel like when I get over there. If you would like to, if you don't trust yourself to just kind of follow these lines and you actually want to draw lines on, you can do that with a water-soluble pin that you can kind of get a damp cloth and wipe off after you're done. You could use the friction pins and then iron off your lines. Just note that if your bag gets cold, the friction pins will reappear on the outside, so you may not want to do that. So you might have to play around with this a little bit on your machine, but I actually don't really adjust my tension or anything. This particular machine does have a little setting up here where I can reduce the pressure of the top foot, and I do lighten that up a little bit just so it's not, moving it around so much, since there's some batting under here. But for the most part, I just go ahead and go for it. I think you could probably get away with it on most machines. So here we go. And I'm just using my foot right here and running it along this edge. I'm going to do that all the way down. Okay, and then I'm actually not even going to cut my thread. I'm just going to lift it up sew a little ways till about right. There. Kind of eyeball a lot of stuff, guys, so you can be more precise if you want to be. And then again, I'm going to run one this way. So I've already done all of my horizontal lines on this side of these strips. So now I'm going to do these vertical lines. And what I like to do is start at where this horizontal stitch line started. And I'll just do a little back stitch right here, just like a couple. And then I'll sew all the way down this seam. And then I stop right on this next stitch line, lift up my needle, turn it. I'll stitch right along that line, or as close to it as I can. Lift it, turn it, and continue on. And then I'm going to do this little back stitch right there and cut it. That way when you don't have extra lines coming right here. You could totally do that if you wanted. It doesn't really matter. That's just kind of how I do it, and I thought I would share that little tip. And then I come over and do the next one. Okay, I'm all done quilting it, and I'm just going to trim off some of these threads, and then I'm going to take my entire piece and I'm going to size it up following the instructions that are in the down bar below. If you made your bag a different size, then you can just kind of clean up the edges. Alrighty, first thing I'm going to do is just trim up one of these sides, and I kind of line up one of the lines on my rulers, the other one is on the edge of the bag up here. And just trim that off, and I'll do the same thing to this side, and then I'll do the long sides. All right, now when I'm doing these longer edges, I'm going to just pick one of the lines on the edge of my ruler here and line it up on this side, and then I'll line it up on this side. And I just try and cut it as straight as possible. And because my ruler isn't quite long enough. There we go. And I just need to do this edge and we're good to go. All right, so we've got the outside of our bag all quilted. Here's the back side, not very exciting, but it's nice and quilted. It's all trimmed to size. And now we're gonna work on our lining, our pockets, and our handles. And if you're curious, and here's just a close-up of my quilting. So I just did some lines about 1/4 of an inch horizontally, and then I did them on both sides vertically. And then this one is probably virtually impossible to see. You might be able to see it on this side. Of the quilting. I just did 3 straight lines. So I did one at 1/4 of an inch right here, and then I just kind of eyeballed one in the middle and one right here, knowing that there's also going to be a seam at the top. So you can kind of do whatever you want. And then on the bottom, I actually decided just to leave it because I liked the gingham, and since it's quilted on the patchwork sections, I think that this will be fine. You want to read the instructions on your batting to make sure how many inches you're allowed to leave if you're planning on washing this bag, because if you don't quilt it tight enough, the batting can kind of over time, you know, bunch up in there. But this section isn't that long, and I think it'll be fine. So that is my finished quilted piece, and we are going to set this piece aside and start working on the lining and the handles and the pocket. Okay, so here is our pocket piece, and here is our little pocket piece of batting. You do not have to put batting in your pocket if you don't want. You could simply fold your pocket in half, right sides together, and then sew along these edges, leaving a space open, and then you can flip it inside out and iron it and then close up that when you attach it to the lining. I like to have my pocket a little bit more, just a little bit thicker. And so what I'm actually going to do, instead of turning my pocket, is I am going to iron it where I want my creases. So I'm going to iron a crease here. And then I'm also going to iron 1/4 of an inch on the edges, on the ends, both ends. Sorry, you can't see that, both ends. and then 1/4 of an inch along both sides. And then I'm going to just place my batting on the inside and sew around it that way. So let's do the halfway mark first. I guess it doesn't really matter what order you do it in. So I'm just going to press it in half first. And I do have text on my pocket, so I'm going to make sure that my pocket is, you know, right side up. And then I'm going to carefully do 1/4 of an inch on all 4 edges. So there's that one. That one. And then without burning my finger, I'm going to do one on this edge. And one on this edge. Okay. All right, so we've got that. And then now we don't have any raw edges sticking out, and I'll show you how we're going to sew that. Okay, so I've pressed all of my edges, and then I'm going to take my piece of batting and just kind of open up my edges and just kind of tuck my batting in there. If it's a little bit too wide, you don't want the batting going over where your seam is or your crease is, so you can just trim it a little bit to make sure it fits perfectly, especially if you've made your pocket a different size. And then your edges should lay over your batting. Okay, and then we're just going to take this section and fold it over the top, and then you might just have to kind of press in those seams just a little bit to make sure they're not sticking out. And then what I'm going to do is take this over to the sewing machine, and I'll probably, just because I've got some little seams right there that are kind of wanting to pop out, I'm going to grab a couple Wonder Clips and just place them on those edges just so they don't go anywhere while I'm quilting it. Okay. All right, now I am actually not going to sew around the edge just yet. I'm going to sew along this top edge. This is my folded edge, so this is going to be my top edge. And then I'm going to do just a couple of horizontal, sorry, the pocket goes like this. I'm going to do a couple of horizontal stitches across there just to hold that batting in there. And then when we add the pocket to our lining, then we'll sew around these edges, closing them up. So for now, just make sure that they're tucked in and kind of out of your way. And then let's go over to the sewing machine and just make sure you do, like, I do about 1/8 of an inch on this top stitch just to make it look kind of nice and finished, because this will be the top of the pocket and you're not gonna actually stitch that to the lining. All right, so let's run over and do a few. You could also do some free motion quilting on this or anything you want, or you could skip the batting altogether. Okay, now I've just trimmed off my little extra stitches. We still have our pocket kind of open down here, and this open side is going to be the bottom of our pocket, so we're not kind of catching it when we put things into our pocket, and the folded side will be the top. So you're just going to grab your lining and kind of center it horizontally and a little bit closer towards the top than the bottom, because this will be the bottom of the bag right here. And so just kind of center your pocket wherever you want it. Mine is about let's say 3.5 inches on those sides, and then about 2 3/4 inches from the top. It doesn't have to be perfect, just wherever you want it. And then you can pin this on. Since we're going to be taking this over to the sewing machine, I would probably just stick a couple of pins in here just to kind of keep it in place and keep it, you know, from getting crooked or anything like that. So I'm just going to pop a couple of pins on there, no big deal. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to run a seam all the way around these 3 edges. Of course, leave your top of your pocket open, and you just want to make sure that as you're running your seam, you're getting these folded seams in as well so that they don't come open. And if you run about 1/8 of an inch from the edge on all 4 sides, you should be good. So we're going to go ahead and attach our pocket to our lining, and then we'll be right back. I also will do a few back stitches here just because that pocket will get tugged on, and so I just want it to be a little bit extra secure right there, and then I'll get going sewing. When you get down here to your corner, just make sure that all of your ends are pushed in there. Leave your needle in the down position, lift up your foot, and then continue on. And then I'll do another back stitch here on this edge. And there we go, we've got our pocket attached to our lining. Okay, so we've got our pocket lining with a pocket on it. Make sure that you have it right side up. And then this is the bottom. And then we're gonna take our other piece of lining and match those up and lay them right sides together. And then what we're going to do is sew. We're gonna leave the top open, so do not sew across this line. We're gonna sew down this side to about here, and down this side to about here. So along the bottom and both sides of the bags, leaving open a space to turn. And I leave about, I don't know, what is that, like 4 or so inches at the bottom to turn your bag through. If you don't do this step, then you're not gonna be able to turn your bag right side out, and it'll be a mess. Alright, and then when you get to this point, you just do a little back stitch. Just because you're going to be tugging on that section when you put it through. Skip over about 4 or 5 inches and a little back stitch and keep going. Okay, so here is our lining, and we've got a little opening down here at the bottom to turn our bag, and then the entire top of the lining is also open with our pocket. And we're just gonna leave it like this and set it aside. Okay, so now we're gonna work on our straps, and I'm gonna kind of handle the straps the same way I handled the pocket. So I'm basically gonna take my strap and press it in half lengthwise. And then I'm also going to press in 1/4 of an inch along this edge and 1/4 of an inch along this edge. You don't need to worry about these farther ends because they're going to be hidden in your seam of your bag, and so we don't need those to look all nice and pretty. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go ahead. It doesn't really matter what order you press this in, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this one first. And if you guys are wondering, this is a Panasonic cordless. I think it's like WL600, and I love it. It holds its heat really well. I was worried about a cordless iron, but I'll put a link for it below. It's double pointed, which is nice, and I can just not be restricted by a cord. Okay, so there's the 1/4 of an inch all the way down there. And then we're going to fold it in half and just line up those edges and press, and we're going to do that to both of our straps. Alright, so here are the straps that are all nice and pressed, and then here are my strips of batting. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with my pocket. I'm just going to open up my strap here and just place my batting kind of down the middle of it. Flip it over. And then I'm going to take this whole thing over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to run, first one I'm going to do is just down this open edge, and I'm going to run about a quarter or an eighth of an inch away from that edge, an eighth of an inch away from this edge, and then probably one right down the middle. I'm going to do that on both of these straps just to kind of secure the batting in there. Like I said, if you don't want to use batting, you can totally skip this step and just do the stitching for decoration. You could just do the edges. Totally up to you on this. But, all right, so let's take this over and stitch in our batting. Okay, here are my finished straps, and I'm just going to take some scissors and just kind of chop off my little pieces of batting that I have hanging out here on both ends. Okay, and we are ready to assemble our bag. Okay, now grab your piece of outer fabric that we have already created, and we're just going to line it up right sides together and fold it in half like so. And then we're just going to stitch a quarter of an inch down this side and down this side. Make sure you leave your top open, and then your bottom should just be a solid piece. Okay, so here is our piece, our outer portion of our bag, and I just sewed down both sides. The top again is open, bottom is solid, and now we're going to box the bottom of our bag. So all that means is this little kind of boxy corner right here. If you want to skip this step, you totally can, and then your box would just, or your bag would just be, you know, flatter. But I like to add a little boxy bottom to my bags just to, I don't know, just to give them a little bit more design. Okay, so how we're going to do that is I'm going to stick my hand inside the opening, and I've got one of my fingers into this little point right here, and you just kind of want to fold it in half and make a triangle. And I actually do that on the other side at the same time. So essentially, I've kind of got these seams down here lined up, so I know that I've got my bag folded down the middle. So I've got a point on this side and a point on this side, okay? So we've got this like nice little diamond here. And then this part is totally up to you, however large you'd like to make your boxy bottom. The one on my bag is only 1.5 inches in from the bottom, and so what you want to do is just take your ruler, place it on the point of your triangle here at 1.5 inches. This is my 1.5 inch line, and then I also line up this diagonal against one of these edges, doesn't really matter, and I just draw a line across here like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and stick a pin in there just to kind of hold it in place, and then I'm going to fold that one out of the way, and I'm going to do the same thing on this corner. So I'm at my 1.5 inch mark. I lined up this diagonal line on my ruler, and there we go. I'm going to throw another pin in there to hold this one. So this is the lining, or the outer portion of our bag. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to take it over the sewing machine and sew along this line and along this line, and then we'll chop it off at about 1/2 inch or 1/4 of an inch. But first, before I go and do that, I'm also going to do the same thing to my lining. So I'm going to set that out of the way, and here is the lining of our bag that we created already. Again, here's the top opening, and then here's the bottom. Now you just have to be careful because you do have a hole in here, but I'm basically going to do the same technique. I'm going to stick one of my fingers up in this corner and flatten it out. Well, might be easier with the bag lining if you do it this way first. Line up these seams down here on the bottom so they're basically straight, and then poke out this corner and the one below it. The lining is just a little bit more fickle because you know, batting is just a little bit more sturdy. So just do the best you can. Just make sure that you're basically getting it folded in half. Okay, so there's that point, and here's this point, and then we're going to do the same thing We're going to mark it at 1.5 inches. And you can make yours a little bit boxier if you want, do 2 inches or whatever. I find that 1.5 to 2 inches is a good boxy bottom. This one isn't very large, but it's perfect for what I needed my bag for. Okay, so we're gonna mark that one. Open it up. Just make sure this guy is straight. It's a little crooked. There we go. And do the same thing. Okay, and then we're going to take all 4 of these corners over to the sewing machine, sew along the lines, and cut them off, and then we'll assemble our bags. All right, so the good news about marking them like this is I just have to flip this one out of the way. I do a back stitch at the front and back and get my pin out of the way there. All right, now I'm going to fold that piece out of the way and do this one. So there is the outside of our bag, and now we're going to do the same thing to the lining. Okay, fold that one out of the way and do this one. And you've done all 4 corners in record time. Okay, so here we are, and before you do this, you could turn this inside out and just make sure you kind of like that, because once you cut it, you can't really change it. But if you wanted it to be less or more, you could kind of adjust it, you know, just rip that out and redo it. But I like this, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it about, I don't know, 1/4 inch or so from the edge. And I'm going to do that for the lining as well. And it doesn't have to be perfect because this is going to be hidden. Okay, now we only have one more step to do before we assemble our bag. So we're going to take our outer bag and flip it right side out. And we are leaving the lining portion inside out. And you can just poke out those corners we just did. I just use my finger, but if you need to use like the end of a pencil or something, you could do that. Okay, so here is that. And now we want to add our straps. All right, and so if you would like, you can kind of press this. Totally up to you. If you're, you know, you've got a thicker seam in here and it's not laying nicely, you can kind of press those edges. I'm going to just leave mine. But we're going to attach our handles now. And so what you're going to do is grab one of your straps and just place it on here. Just make sure that you don't, you know, twist it. You don't want to see any weird twisting right here. Make sure that it's straight, like so. And then we're just going to clip it on, and you can measure. I'm going to do mine about 2 inches from the edge here, just because I like the way that that looks, and I'm just using my mat here. I'm not getting super specific. Okay, so attach that one, make sure there's no twist, flip it over, and then we're going to do the same thing with the other handle. Again, I'm just looking at my mat. You could also line it up with the other strap. And I'm just using some Clover Wonder Clips. You could use pins or whatever you have on hand. Okay. All right, so those are in there. Make sure your straps aren't twisted at all. They should kind of be able to lay flat like that. And then we're going to take this whole section and we're going to place it inside of our lining. So the lining is inside out. We're going to open it up. And take our bag, and I kind of like to fold it in half like this and sort of stick it in there. And then you can kind of unfold it, but whatever works for you. Get it all the way in there. Once you have it, the inside of your bag in there, make sure that you've got right sides touching. This is your lining, this is your outer portion of your bag. And I always start at these seamed edges over here, and I just kind of line up those seams And then I'll stick some Wonder Clips here. So I'm going to start on that seam. Then I'm also going to do one over on this seam. Like so. Okay. And then I just kind of straighten it out in there and then just attach it kind of around. And I'm just going to use the same clip that's holding on my handle right there. Here's another one. Just kind of straighten it out. My handle got crooked. And then I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on this side. Just make sure I have all those. If you'd like, you can kind of put one in the middle here. Just want to make sure that all of your edges are lined up nicely and you've got your straps in there as well. So however many pins or clips you want to put in is totally up to you. Okay, all right, so now I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, and I do not exactly a 1/2 inch, but like a generous 1/4 inch, somewhere in between there, just to make sure that I'm catching my straps. And then when I get to my straps, I usually go back and forth over them a couple of times just to secure them in there a little bit better. But we're basically going to sew all the way around the entire hoop right here. Okay, so I'm coming up to my first handle right here, and I'm just going to go back and forth over it a few times just to give it a little bit of extra strength. And then keep going. And then when I get all the way around to the end, I'm just going to run a little back stitch right here just to kind of secure it. Okay, time for the magic. So you're going to just carefully, through the opening that you had in your lining, pull your bag out. And if you tear it just a little bit, it's okay. Just try and be gentle. All right, so here we've got our bag, we've got our handles, should be looking something like this, and then the lining coming up from the top. So we've only got 2 more steps and then we're done. The first step that we're going to do is close up our lining. And you can press this or you can just kind of finger press it, but you've got this opening right here and it should already kind of naturally want to go in about a 1/4 inch or so. So you can kind of just grab that, finger press it, and then you can either hand stitch this closed, or usually at this point in the process I'm like ready to be done, and I will just machine stitch it just really close to the edge, just making sure that you get you know, the entire hole so you don't have any holes open. So I'm just going to run a straight stitch right along to close up that opening about 1/8 inch or so away from the edge. And I'm just being really careful to get both those pieces, but so as close to the edge as I can. All right, so we've closed up our bag, and I usually just check it because I have sewn across there before and just left a little hole. So you can just fix that now and just trim off your extra threads. And then now we're going to go ahead and push our lining into our bag. And I just kind of pop out these corners. And then you might just need to roll this edge a little bit. And you can hit this with an iron if you like. Totally up to you. I'll probably hit it with an iron really quickly. And then our last step is to just run a 1/4 inch or more, 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch seam all the way around this edge just to finish it off. It gives you a little bit more hold for your handle, and then it also keeps this lining from, you know, coming out as you're using your bag and whatnot. Alright everyone, so that is the tutorial for how to make this fun bag. It's a little patchwork bag, super fun and super easy. You can really kind of whip one of these out in about an hour to an hour and a half depending. Honestly, I think the hardest part was picking the fabric for the project, so that always takes me the longest, but that's just me. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. If you have any other tutorials that you would like to see, please make sure to leave a comment below, or if you have any questions, I will put all of my contact information and all of that below, as well as a link to my blog post, which will have even more information on this specific bag. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.